The silence in the doctor's office hung heavy as an anvil when Meredith Lawson received the news that would shatter her world in the spring of 1876. "I'm sorry, Miss Lawson, but your womb appears to be barren. You will never bear children," the doctor had said with clinical detachment, as if he were merely commenting on the weather and not destroying her most cherished dream. Meredith clutched the worn leather satchel in her lap, her knuckles white with tension as she walked out into the dusty main street of Silver Creek, Wyoming territory. At 24, she had always imagined a future filled with the laughter of children, a family of her own. Now that dream lay in ruins at her feet, as broken as the dirt beneath her worn boots. The news spread through Silver Creek like wildfire, as all gossip did in a town where entertainment was as scarce as rain. Meredith felt the whispers follow her, saw the pitying glances, heard the cruel murmurs behind cupped hands. "Poor thing," they said. "What man would want her now?" In a land where survival demanded strong backs and many hands, a woman who couldn't bear children was considered as useful as a dried-up well. Meredith had come west 3 years earlier, following the death of her parents in Boston. Her Aunt Martha had taken her in, giving her work at the small mercantile she owned. Life had been steady, if not exciting, until Martha's passing the previous winter had left Meredith alone once more, with only the store as her inheritance and lifeline. As she approached the mercantile, Meredith straightened her spine and wiped away the single tear that had escaped. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. She had weathered loss before, she would weather this too. But as she unlocked the door to the store, a heaviness settled in her chest that felt permanent, like the mountains that loomed in the distance. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and Meredith forced herself to go through the motions of opening the store. She dusted the shelves lined with canned goods, bolts of fabric, and sundry items that the townsfolk of Silver Creek depended upon. Outside, the town was coming to life as wagons rumbled down the main street and shopkeepers opened their doors to the cool morning air. "Miss Lawson," a deep voice called from the doorway. Meredith turned to find Sheriff Williams standing awkwardly by the entrance, hat in hand. His weathered face was creased with concern that made her stomach clench. "Sheriff," she acknowledged with a nod, continuing to arrange a display of tobacco tins. "I heard about your situation," he said, voice lowered. "Just wanted to check that you were all right." "News travels fast," Meredith replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "I'm quite well, thank you." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Well, if you need anything, you just let me know." After he left, Meredith's composed facade crumbled momentarily. She braced herself against the counter, trying to steady her breathing. It was going to be a long day. By midday, the mercantile had seen a steady stream of customers, many of whom seemed to find sudden, urgent needs for items they could have purchased any other day. Their curious eyes followed Meredith as she moved about the store, their conversation faltering when she drew near. "I heard the doctor said it was because of a childhood fever," Mrs. Peterson whispered to Mrs. Daniels, not quietly enough. "Such a shame. With her looks, she could have made a fine match too," Mrs. Daniels replied with a cluck of her tongue. Meredith's cheeks burned, but she kept her head high. Let them talk. Words couldn't hurt her any more than the doctor's pronouncement already had. The afternoon brought a lull in business, allowing Meredith a moment's peace. She was updating the ledger when the door opened again, the bell announcing another visitor. She looked up to see a man she didn't recognize, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. Dust covered his clothes, and his boots bore the mud of long travels. "Afternoon, madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal hair the color of wheat, streaked with gold from the sun. "Luke Preston. Just rode into town." Meredith nodded politely. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Mr. Preston. What can I help you with today?" "Need some supplies," he said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of Texas. "Been on the trail for a while." As he moved through the store, selecting items with careful consideration, Meredith found herself watching him. There was something in the way he moved, deliberate but not slow, confident but not cocky, that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. "You new to these parts?" she asked as she tallied his purchases. "Passing through," he replied. "Got a job offer at the Thompson Ranch outside of town. Thought I'd give it a look." Mr. Thompson runs a good operation, Meredith said. Tough but fair, from what I hear. Luke nodded, a small smile lifting the corner of his mouth. That's what I like to hear. He paid for his goods and gathered them up. Much obliged, Mississippi. Lawson. Meredith Lawson. Something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps. Had he already heard the whispers? Pleasure to meet you, Miss Lawson, he said with a tip of his hat. Reckon I'll be seeing you around town. As the door closed behind him, Meredith found herself wondering about the stranger. There was something refreshing about a conversation that didn't carry the weight of pity or curiosity about her condition. The remainder of the day passed slowly, each interaction an exercise in maintaining dignity in the face of poorly disguised sympathy. By closing time, Meredith's smile felt permanently etched onto her face, a mask she could no longer remove. After locking up, she climbed the stairs to her small apartment above the store. It was a modest space but comfortable, with a few cherished items from her life back east. She lit a lamp and moved to the window that overlooked the main street. Silver Creek was quieting for the night, though light and music spilled from the saloon at the far end of town. In the waning light, she caught sight of the cowboy Luke Preston emerging from the hotel across the street. He paused on the boardwalk, lighting a cigarette, the match briefly illuminating his face. He looked up, as if sensing her gaze, and their eyes met across the distance. Meredith stepped back from the window, heart inexplicably racing. She turned away, chiding herself for acting like a schoolgirl. What did it matter if a handsome cowboy had come to town? Her future was set now, the lonely spinster shopkeeper, the object of pity and whispers. She would never know the joy of marriage, of creating life, of building a family. The finality of it crashed over her anew, and she sank onto her bed, allowing herself, in the privacy of her room, to weep for all that would never be. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of day that usually lifted Meredith's spirits. She went through her morning routine mechanically, washing her face, pinning her chestnut hair into a neat bun, and donning a simple blue dress before heading downstairs to open the store. She had just unlocked the door when she noticed a commotion down the street. A crowd had gathered outside the saloon, and the raised voices carried on the morning air. Curiosity got the better of her, and she stepped out onto the boardwalk. "What's happening?" she asked Mrs. Turner, who was hurrying past. "Fight at the saloon last night," Mrs. Turner replied breathlessly. That new fella, the cowboy, laid out Frank Miller something fierce when Frank made some unsavory comments. Meredith's stomach tightened. Frank Miller was the town bully, a man whose mean streak grew with each drink. Is anyone hurt? The cowboy's got a split lip, but Frank's nursing a broken nose and wounded pride, Mrs. Turner said with undisguised satisfaction. Sheriff's sorting it out now. Meredith returned to the store, mind racing. What could have prompted such a confrontation on Luke Preston's first night in town? Frank was known for picking fights, but it usually took more than a few hours for him to take a dislike to someone. The answer came an hour later when Sheriff Williams stepped into the mercantile, followed by Luke Preston himself, the split lip evident, but otherwise looking no worse for wear. "Miss Lawson," the sheriff greeted her. "Mr. Preston here needs a few supplies to replace some that got damaged last night. I told him you'd treat him fair." Luke met her gaze steadily, a hint of defiance in his eyes. "Morning, Miss Lawson." "Mr. Preston," she acknowledged, noting the tension in his jaw. "What can I help you with?" The sheriff tipped his hat. "I'll leave you to it. Try to stay out of trouble, Preston," he added, though there was no real admonishment in his tone. Once they were alone, Meredith raised an eyebrow. "Quite the impression you're making on our little town." Luke's mouth quirked into a half-smile that made her heart skip. "Not how I planned to start things off," he admitted. "And what did Frank Miller say to deserve a broken nose?" she asked, moving behind the counter. Luke's expression hardened. "Nothing worth repeating to a lady." Meredith studied him. It must have been quite offensive to provoke such a reaction from a stranger. "Some men don't know when to keep their opinions to themselves," Luke said, examining a shelf of tobacco. "Especially when they're talking about people they should respect." A suspicion formed in Meredith's mind. These opinions, they wouldn't have been about me, would they? Luke's silence was answer enough. Heat rose to Meredith's cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from anger. "I don't need a champion, Mr. Preston," she said stiffly. "I've managed the gossip in this town long before you arrived." He turned to face her, and the intensity in his gaze caught her off guard. "Everyone needs someone in their corner sometimes, Miss Lawson, even if they don't know it." "You don't know me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know enough," he replied. "I know that a man who speaks ill of a woman he barely knows deserves what he gets." Meredith didn't know how to respond. She was accustomed to pity, to curious stares, to whispers behind her back, but not to defense, not to someone standing up for her honor. "What do you need to replace?" she asked, changing the subject. Luke seemed to accept the shift. "Shirt got torn. Could use some tobacco and rolling papers too." As she gathered the items, Meredith was acutely aware of his presence, of the way he moved around her store with the same easy confidence he'd shown the day before. There was something compelling about him, something that made her want to know more. "You said you're here for a job at the Thompson Ranch," she asked as she wrapped his purchases. Luke nodded. "Been working cattle since I was big enough to sit a horse. Spent the last few years driving herds up from Texas, but I'm looking to settle somewhere for a while." "And you chose Silver Creek?" she asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Silver Creek was a decent town, but hardly the kind of place that attracted newcomers looking to put down roots. A smile played at his lips. "Seems as good a place as any. Might turn out to be better than most." There was something in the way he looked at her that made Meredith's heart flutter, a sensation she hadn't felt in years if ever. She quickly calculated his total, trying to ignore the warmth spreading through her. "That'll be 95 cents, she said, proud that her voice remained steady. Luke counted out the coins and placed them in her hand, his fingers brushing against her palm. "Much obliged, Miss Lawson." "Mr. Preston," she acknowledged with a nod, pulling her hand back perhaps too quickly. "Good luck with Mr. Thompson." He settled his hat back on his head. "I make my own luck," he said with a grin that transformed his face, making him look younger, almost boyish. "But I appreciate the sentiment all the same." After he left, Meredith found herself smiling despite her best efforts not to. It was foolish to read anything into his actions or words. He was simply a decent man who didn't tolerate others speaking ill of women. Nothing more. Yet as the day wore on, she found her thoughts drifting back to him, to the intensity in his blue eyes, to the way he'd stood up for her without even knowing her story. It had been a long time since anyone had seen her as something other than the object of pity or gossip. That evening, as she was closing up the store, the door opened one last time. Meredith looked up, expecting to see a last-minute customer needing a forgotten item for supper. Instead, Luke Preston stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Mr. Preston," she said, surprised. "I thought you'd be out at the Thompson Ranch by now." "Heading out there tomorrow," he replied. "Thought I'd spend one more night in town." He cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you might join me for supper at the hotel. They say the cooking's decent." Meredith stared at him, momentarily speechless. It had been so long since anyone had asked to court her, not that this was courting, she reminded herself. It was just supper. "I don't think that would be wise, Mr. Preston," she said carefully. "People talk in this town." "Let them," he said with a shrug. "I've never much cared what people think." "Well, I have to live here after you move on," Meredith pointed out. "And dining with a man I barely know would certainly give them something new to talk about." Luke's expression fell slightly, but he nodded. "I understand. Maybe another time, when we're not such strangers." He turned to go, then paused. "For what it's worth, Miss Lawson, I think this town doesn't know what a treasure they have in you." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Meredith standing in the middle of her store, heart pounding and mind whirling with possibilities she had thought forever closed to her. The next few days passed without any sign of Luke Preston. Meredith told herself it was for the best. What future could there be with a cowboy who would likely move on when the season changed? Men like him didn't settle, not with women like her, women who couldn't give them sons to carry on their name or daughters to cherish. Yet she found herself watching the door each time the bell rang, a flicker of disappointment coursing through her when it wasn't him. It was foolish, this schoolgirl infatuation with a man she barely knew. Foolish and dangerous to her heart. A week after Luke had ridden out to the Thompson Ranch, the bell above the door jingled, and Meredith looked up from her ledger to see him standing there, looking more at home in his surroundings than he had before. His skin was darker from days working in the sun, and there was a new confidence in his stance. Miss Lawson. He greeted her with a tip of his hat. Store's looking mighty fine today. Mr. Preston, she replied, hoping her voice didn't betray her pleasure at seeing him. I take it the job at Thompson's worked out. It did, he confirmed, approaching the counter. Ranch foreman, in fact. Old one decided to head back east to be with his daughter. Congratulations, Meredith said sincerely. That's quite a responsibility. It is, he agreed. Means I'll be staying in these parts for the foreseeable future. His eyes held hers, the implication clear in his gaze. Meredith broke the contact first, busying herself with straightening already neat stacks of fabric. Did you need supplies? Actually, Luke said, leaning against the counter. I came to ask if you'd reconsider having supper with me. Now that I'm a respectable ranch foreman and not just a drifting cowhand. Meredith's heart leapt traitorously, but caution held her back. Mr. Preston, Luke, he corrected gently. If we're going to be neighbors, might as well use my given name. Luke, she conceded, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. I'm flattered by your invitation, but you're worried about wagging tongues, he finished for her. I understand that. What if I said I didn't give a damn what anyone in this town thinks, except for you? His directness took her breath away. I would say you're either very brave or very foolish, she managed. A slow smile spread across his face. Been called both at various times. Usually turns out to be a bit of both. He straightened. Decision made. I'll be back on Saturday evening. 6 o'clock. We can dine at the hotel where everyone can see we've got nothing to hide. Or I can bring a picnic and we can find a quiet spot outside of town. Your choice. Before she could protest further, he tipped his hat and strode out, leaving Meredith staring after him, caught between excitement and trepidation. What was she doing? Getting involved with any man would only lead to heartbreak once he learned the truth if he didn't know already. And yet, the thought of spending an evening in Luke's company made her heart race like it hadn't in years. Saturday arrived with alarming speed. Meredith had spent the intervening days in a state of nervous anticipation, alternating between looking forward to the evening and convincing herself she should cancel. But as 6 o'clock approached, she found herself changing into her best dress, a deep green that brought out the amber flecks in her eyes, and pinning her hair in a softer style than her usual practical bun. When Luke arrived, the appreciation in his eyes as he took in her appearance made the effort worthwhile. He had cleaned up as well, his usual trail-worn clothes replaced by a crisp white shirt, dark vest, and clean pants. His hair was neatly combed, though a rebellious strand fell across his forehead in a way that made Meredith's fingers itch to brush it back. You look beautiful, Meredith, he said, the use of her given name sending a shiver down her spine. Thank you, she replied, suddenly shy. You clean up well yourself. He offered his arm. I've got a wagon outside. Thought we might take that picnic after all, if you're agreeable. There's a nice spot by the creek just outside of town. Meredith hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his arm. That sounds lovely. The ride out of town was pleasant, the evening air warm but not uncomfortable. Luke kept the conversation light, telling her about his first week at the Thompson Ranch, about the characters he'd met there and the challenges he'd faced. Meredith found herself relaxing in his company, laughing at his stories and sharing some of her own about the quirks of running a mercantile in a small town. The spot he'd chosen for their picnic was perfect, a grassy area beneath a stand of cottonwoods, the creek bubbling nearby providing a soothing backdrop. Luke spread a blanket and unpacked a surprisingly elaborate meal. Fried chicken, cornbread, beans, and even a jar of preserves he admitted he'd bought from her own store. This is wonderful, Meredith said as they ate, the tension of the past weeks melting away in the peaceful setting. I haven't been on a picnic since I was a girl in Boston. Boston, Luke repeated, eyebrows raised. That's a long way from Silver Creek. What brought you out here? Meredith told him about her parents' death, about coming west to live with her Aunt Martha, about inheriting the store when Martha passed. It was easy to talk to Luke, she found. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was truly engaged in her story. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, the conversation turned more personal. Why Silver Creek for you? Meredith asked. A man with your skills could work anywhere. Luke was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the horizon. Been moving around most of my life, he finally said. After the war, couldn't seem to settle anywhere. Drove cattle, broke horses, worked ranches from Texas to Montana. But a man gets tired of not belonging anywhere. And you think you might belong here? Meredith asked softly. He turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. I'm starting to think I might. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibility. Meredith knew she should pull back, should tell him the truth about herself before things went any further. But in that moment, with the sunset painting the world in gold and Luke looking at her like she was something precious, she couldn't bring herself to shatter the illusion. It's getting late, she said instead, beginning to gather the remains of their meal. We should head back before it's fully dark. Luke helped her pack up, his movements unhurried. Can I see you again? He asked as he helped her into the wagon. Meredith knew she should say no, knew that encouraging his attention would only lead to pain for both of them. But looking into his hopeful face, she found she couldn't deny herself this small happiness, even if it was temporary. Yes, she said simply. His smile was like the sunrise. The following weeks saw a courtship that set the town of Silver Creek buzzing with fresh gossip. Luke Preston called on Meredith Lawson regularly, bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry he'd found in the next town over. They took rides together on Sundays after church, picnicked by the creek, and sometimes simply sat on the porch of her store in the evenings, talking until the stars came out. Meredith knew what people were saying. Some thought it romantic, others thought it foolish, a cowboy courting a barren woman. She caught the whispers, saw the looks, but for the first time, she found she truly didn't care. Luke's presence in her life had awakened something she thought had died with the doctor's pronouncement, hope. Yet as their relationship deepened, the weight of her secret grew heavier. Luke had never mentioned her condition, had never given any indication that he knew what the town whispered about her. And Meredith couldn't bring herself to tell him, terrified that the warmth in his eyes would be replaced by pity, or worse, that he would withdraw completely. It was a warm evening in late June when everything changed. They were sitting on a bench outside the mercantile, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. Luke had been quiet, more thoughtful than usual, and Meredith had respected his silence, content to simply be in his presence. I've been thinking, he said finally, turning to face her. About the future. Meredith's heart stuttered. Oh, I've never been much good with words, Luke said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. So I'll just say it plain. I love you, Meredith Lawson. Have since the moment I walked into your store. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Tears sprang to Meredith's eyes, joy and sorrow tangled together in her heart. Luke, you don't know what you're asking, she whispered. He took her hands in his gaze steady. I'm asking to marry the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. I'm asking to build a life with you, here in Silver Creek or wherever you want to go. There are things about me you don't know, Meredith said, her voice catching. Things that might change how you feel. Nothing could change how I feel about you, Luke said with such certainty that Meredith almost believed him. I can't have children, she blurted out, the words falling from her lips like stones. The doctor said my womb is empty. Barren. I can never give you a family, Luke. Never give you sons to carry on your name or daughters to cherish. That's what everyone's been whispering about. The poor, barren spinster. She tried to pull her hands away, but Luke held firm, his expression unchanging. Is that all? He asked, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. Meredith stared at him in disbelief. Is that all? Did you not hear what I said? I heard you, Luke replied, his voice gentle. And I'm asking if that's all that's been troubling you. Isn't it enough? Meredith asked, tears spilling down her cheeks now. Every man wants children, needs children in this land. What use is a wife who can't give you that? Luke released one of her hands to cup her cheek, brushing away her tears with his thumb. Meredith, I don't love you for your womb. I love you for your heart, your spirit. The way you face each day with courage, the way you care for this town even when they whisper behind your back, the way you look at me like I'm worth something. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. As for children, there are plenty in this world who need homes, need love. If you want a family, we'll build one way or another. But even if it's just you and me until the end of our days, that would be enough for me. More than enough. Meredith could hardly believe what she was hearing. You knew? All this time. Luke nodded. Frank Miller made sure to inform me your first night in town. Thought it would scare me off. Instead, it just made me want to break his nose. A watery laugh escaped Meredith. That's why you fought him. One of the reasons, Luke admitted with a grin. He also cheats at cards. Meredith's mind was reeling. All this time, he had known, and still he had pursued her. Still he looked at her with love rather than pity. So, Luke said, pulling back slightly to meet her gaze. Now that we've got that out of the way, Meredith Lawson, will you marry me? Joy bloomed in Meredith's chest, unfurling like a flower in the sun. Yes, she whispered, then more firmly. Yes, Luke Preston, I will marry you. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, the stars had emerged in the darkening sky. Well, Luke said, his voice husky, reckon we just gave the town something new to talk about. Meredith laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. Let them talk. For the first time, their whispers couldn't touch her. The wedding took place on a perfect August day, the kind where the sky seems impossibly blue and the air is sweet with the scent of late summer. The small church in Silver Creek was filled to capacity. Some came to witness the union of two well-liked members of the community. Others came out of curiosity or to see the culmination of what had been the town's most interesting gossip in years. Meredith wore a simple dress of ivory satin, her Aunt Martha's pearls at her throat, and wildflowers in her hair. Luke waited for her at the altar in a new suit, his face lighting up when she appeared at the back of the church on Sheriff William's arm, who had kindly offered to give her away. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, their vows spoken with clear voices and unwavering conviction. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Luke bent to kiss his bride, the church erupted in applause that drowned out the few remaining whispers. The celebration afterward was held at the Thompson Ranch, where tables had been set up in the shade of the large barn. There was food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Meredith found herself surrounded by well-wishers, many of the same people who had once pitied her now congratulating her with genuine warmth. Mrs. Preston, Luke said as they swayed together to a slow tune played by a fiddler from the next town over. How does it feel? Wonderful, Meredith replied, her head resting against his chest. Perfect. Luke's arms tightened around her. I aim to make sure you feel that way every day for the rest of our lives. As the evening wound down, Luke helped Meredith into a wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers, courtesy of some of the ranch hands. They were headed not to the small apartment above the mercantile, but to a modest cabin that Luke had been preparing on a piece of land he'd purchased at the edge of town, their new home. When did you manage all this? Meredith asked in amazement as Luke carried her over the threshold. The cabin was small but solidly built, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living space, and a bedroom separated by a curtain. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and someone, likely the women from town, had placed wildflowers in jars throughout the space. Been working on it every spare moment since you said yes, Luke admitted, setting her gently on her feet. Wanted us to have a place that was ours, not just yours or mine. Meredith turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. It's perfect, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Luke came up behind her, his arms encircling her waist. Welcome home, Mrs. Preston, he murmured against her ear. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Meredith's life. She continued to run the mercantile while Luke worked at the Thompson Ranch, but every evening they returned to their little cabin, sharing meals and stories, and building a life together that was richer than Meredith had ever dared to dream. The whispers about her barrenness gradually faded as the town found new gossip to occupy them. The newlyweds became simply another part of the fabric of Silver Creek, their love for each other evident to anyone who saw them together. It was November, with winter's chill beginning to settle over the land, when Meredith first noticed the change. A persistent queasiness in the mornings, a strange tenderness in her breasts, a fatigue that seemed to seep into her bones by mid-afternoon. At first, she dismissed it as perhaps a lingering illness, but as the symptoms persisted, a wild, impossible hope began to take root. After a week of uncertainty, she made the journey to see Dr. Miller, the same physician who had delivered her devastating diagnosis months before. Well, Mrs. Preston, he said after examining her, genuine surprise in his voice. It appears I was mistaken in my earlier assessment. You are with child, about 8 weeks along, I'd estimate. Meredith stared at him in disbelief. But you said. You were so certain. The doctor shook his head, looking somewhat chagrined. Medicine is not an exact science, Mrs. Preston. There are times when we think we know the body's secrets, only to be proven wrong. Your case is unusual, certainly, but not unheard of. Meredith left the doctor's office in a daze, her mind whirling with the impossible news. A child. She was carrying Luke's child. The joy that flooded through her was so intense it was almost painful, bringing tears to her eyes as she walked through town, one hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. She considered waiting to tell Luke, perhaps preparing a special dinner or finding a meaningful way to share the news. But the moment she saw him ride into the yard that evening, his face lighting up at the sight of her as it always did, she couldn't contain herself. Luke, she called, running to meet him as he dismounted. He caught her in his arms, concern immediately etching his features at her tear-streaked face. What is it? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, she said, laughing through her tears. Everything's right. So wonderfully right. Luke set her down gently, his hands on her shoulders. Meredith, you're not making sense. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach, her eyes never leaving his. I'm pregnant, she whispered. We're going to have a baby. Luke's expression shifted from confusion to shock to joy in the span of heartbeats. But the doctor said. He was wrong, Meredith said simply. It happens sometimes. Medicine isn't perfect, and neither was his diagnosis. Luke whooped with joy, lifting her off her feet and spinning her in a circle before setting her down again with sudden gentleness. The baby. I shouldn't jostle you like that. Meredith laughed, the sound pure and free. The baby is fine. We're both fine. Better than fine. Luke knelt before her, his hands cradling her abdomen with reverence. Hello in there, he said softly. Your pa can't wait to meet you. Tears filled Meredith's eyes once more as she watched the man she loved speak to their unborn child with such tenderness. It was a miracle one she had never dared to hope for after that fateful day in the doctor's office. The news of Meredith's pregnancy spread through Silver Creek with the same speed that news of her barrenness had months before. But this time, the whispers were tinged with wonder rather than pity, with joy rather than judgment. A miracle, they called it. The barren woman with child. Some credited divine intervention, others the healing power of love, and a few simply acknowledged that medicine sometimes got it wrong. Whatever the explanation, the town embraced the news with genuine happiness for the couple who had found love against the odds. The months of Meredith's pregnancy passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Luke threw himself into readying their home for the baby, adding a small room off the main bedroom, crafting a cradle from oak with his own hands, and fussing over Meredith with such devoted care that she sometimes had to remind him she wasn't made of glass. Winter gave way to spring, and as Meredith's body blossomed with new life, so too did the land around them. Wildflowers dotted the prairie, trees budded with fresh green, and the creek that ran behind their property babbled with the melting snow from the mountains. It was a warm evening in late May, just as the sun was setting when Meredith's labor began. Luke rode for the midwife, Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived at the edge of town, while Meredith paced their small cabin, breathing through the early contractions. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the night and into the following day. Luke never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement as she worked to bring their child into the world. You're the strongest woman I've ever known, he told her as she battled through a particularly intense contraction. You can do this. We're almost there. As the sun reached its zenith on the second day, with one final, tremendous effort, Meredith gave birth to a healthy baby boy. His lusty cry filled the cabin, the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. You have a son, Mrs. Rodriguez announced, cleaning and wrapping the infant before placing him in Meredith's arms. A son, Luke echoed, his voice thick with emotion as he gazed down at the tiny, red-faced bundle. He's perfect. And he was perfectly formed, with a thatch of dark hair and, when he briefly opened them, eyes that promised to be as blue as his father's. Meredith counted his fingers and toes, marveling at each tiny nail, each perfect crease. "What shall we call him?" Luke asked, his finger caught in the baby's surprisingly strong grip. Meredith looked up at her husband, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. "I was thinking Samuel, after my father." "Samuel Preston." "Samuel," Luke repeated, testing the name. "It suits him. Strong name for a strong boy." As Mrs. Rodriguez quietly slipped out to give the new family time alone, Meredith leaned back against the pillows, exhausted but filled with a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "They said my womb was empty," she murmured, stroking the baby's cheek with one finger. Luke pressed a kiss to her forehead. "And I said your heart was full," he reminded her. "Turns out we were both right, in our own way." Meredith smiled up at him. This man who had seen beyond her perceived flaws to the woman beneath, who had loved her completely and without reservation. "I love you, Luke Preston." "And I love you, Meredith Preston," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You and our son both, more than I ever thought possible." The baby stirred in her arms, his tiny mouth working in a way that made Meredith instinctively guide him to her breast. As he latched on, beginning to nurse, she and Luke watched in wonder. This miracle they had created together. Outside, the town of Silver Creek continued about its business, but word was already spreading of the birth of the Preston baby, the child who wasn't supposed to exist. In the years to come, some would call it a medical mystery, others a testament to the power of love, and a few would simply say it was meant to be that sometimes life finds a way where science says there is none. For Meredith and Luke, the explanation didn't matter. What mattered was the family they had built together, against all odds and expectations. A family that would grow in the years to come with the addition of a daughter 2 years later, and eventually, the orphan children of a neighboring ranch who lost their parents to fevered children who found in the Prestons the loving home they needed. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the house was still, Meredith and Luke would sit on their porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in gold and crimson, his arm around her shoulders, her head against his chest, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together and the love that had made them whole. In a land where survival demanded strength and adaptability, they had found in each other not just a partner for the journey, but a reason for it, a love that defied explanation and expectation, that built something beautiful from what others had deemed broken. And in the end, that was the greatest miracle of all. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, his resemblance to Luke became more pronounced, the same determined chin, the same sky-blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He was a sturdy boy, full of energy and curiosity, the pride of his father and the joy of his mother. By his 3rd birthday, Samuel was already sitting atop his first pony, a gentle creature Luke had carefully selected and trained specifically for their son. Meredith had worried it was too soon, but the sight of Samuel's face lighting up with delight as Luke led the pony around the yard had eased her concerns. "He's a natural, just like his pa," Luke declared proudly, while Meredith captured the moment in her memory, knowing it was one of many firsts they would celebrate together. Their daughter, Elizabeth, arrived in the spring of Samuel's 2nd year, a delicate counterpoint to her brother's robust energy. With Meredith's chestnut hair and a sweet disposition that charmed everyone she met, she quickly became the darling of Silver Creek. 2 children. Meredith marveled to Luke one night as they stood in the doorway of the room the siblings shared, watching them sleep. "Sometimes I still can't believe it." Luke's arm tightened around her waist. "Believe it," he murmured against her hair. "This is our life, Meredith. Our family." The mercantile continued to thrive under Meredith's capable management, though she now had help a young woman named Clara who had moved to town with her husband, eager for work. The arrangement allowed Meredith to balance the store's needs with those of her growing family, a juggling act she managed with the same determination she brought to everything in her life. Luke had risen to become the most respected foreman in the region, his fair treatment of the men under his charge and his knack for handling even the most difficult situations earning him the respect of ranchers throughout the territory. There had been offers from larger operations, tempting him with more money and greater responsibility, but Luke had declined them all. "Everything I want is right here," he told Meredith when she asked if he regretted staying in Silver Creek. Why would I go looking elsewhere? It was the autumn of 1882, with Samuel nearing 5 and Elizabeth just past her 3rd birthday, when tragedy struck the nearby Carlton Ranch. A fever swept through the family, claiming the lives of Thomas and Mary Carlton within days of each other, leaving their 3 children, James, aged 8, Henry, 6, and little Anna, just 4, suddenly orphaned. The news reached Silver Creek on a blustery October day, brought by the Carltons' ranch hand who had ridden for the doctor too late to save either parent. The town council convened hastily to discuss the children's fate, with most agreeing they would need to be sent to the orphanage in Cheyenne, there being no relatives to take them in. Meredith sat beside Luke in the town hall as the discussion unfolded, her heart aching for the Carlton children whom she knew from church and town gatherings, bright, well-mannered children who now faced an uncertain future. The stage to Cheyenne leaves tomorrow, Mayor Thompson was saying. We can arrange for someone to accompany them. No, Meredith said suddenly, the word escaping before she'd fully formed the thought. All eyes turned to her, including Luke's, surprise evident on his face. She stood, hands clasped tightly before her. Those children shouldn't be sent away from the only home they've known, to live among strangers. It's unfortunate, Mrs. Preston, the mayor said kindly, but what alternative is there? They can't run the ranch, and there's no family to take them in. Meredith looked at Luke, a silent question in her eyes. They had discussed expanding their family someday, perhaps taking in a child who needed a home, but they had never spoken of taking in 3 at once. Luke stood beside her, his hand finding hers. We'll take them, he said simply. All 3. A murmur ran through the assembled townspeople. The mayor looked skeptical. That's a generous offer, but are you certain? 5 children is a considerable responsibility. We're certain, Meredith affirmed, squeezing Luke's hand. Our home has room, and our hearts have more. Those children deserve to stay together, to grow up in the community they know, among people who cared for their parents. There was discussion, of course, questions of legality, of practicality, of whether the Prestons truly understood what they were undertaking. But in the end, with the support of Sheriff Williams and Reverend Thomas, it was agreed that the Carlton children would come to live with the Prestons, at least temporarily. Temporarily, Luke had repeated with a small smile as they left the town hall, as if we'd ever let them go once they've become part of our family. The following day, Luke and Meredith drove out to the Carlton Ranch. The property itself would be sold to settle debts, but the children's personal belongings would come with them to their new home. The scene that greeted them was one of quiet desolation, 3 children sitting huddled together on the porch, their faces solemn beyond their years. James, the eldest, stood as the wagon approached, positioning himself protectively in front of his younger siblings. Even in grief, he carried himself with a dignity that reminded Meredith painfully of his father. Hello, James, Meredith said gently as Luke helped her down from the wagon. Do you remember me? Mrs. Preston from town. The boy nodded, his eyes wary. You own the store. That's right, Meredith said, approaching slowly. This is my husband, Luke. We've come to talk to you about something important. As they explained to the children what had been decided, Meredith watched their faces carefully. Fear, uncertainty, confusion all flitted across their expressions. Little Anna began to cry silently, and Henry put his arm around her with an instinct to comfort that spoke volumes about what they had already endured. You want us to come live with you? James asked, his voice carefully controlled. All of us. All of you. Luke confirmed, kneeling to be at eye level with the boy. We have a home with room for you, and we'd be honored if you'd be part of our family. But what about our ma and pa? Henry asked, his lower lip trembling. What about our home? Meredith knelt beside Luke, her heart breaking for these children who had lost everything in the span of a few days. Your ma and pa loved you very much, she said gently, and they would want you to be safe and cared for. Your home is wherever you are together, and we want to help make sure you stay together. James studied them intently, bearing the weight of decision on his young shoulders. Would we have to call you ma and pa? No, Luke said immediately. Not unless you want us someday. You had a ma and pa who loved you, and no one can replace them. You can call us Luke and Meredith. Slowly, James nodded. We'll come, he said, speaking for his siblings. But I need to make sure Anna has her doll, and Henry needs his wooden horse that Pa made him. Of course, Meredith assured him, tears pricking at her eyes at the boy's maturity. We'll make sure you have everything important to you. The journey back to the Preston home was quiet. The three Carleton children huddled together in the back of the wagon, their few possessions packed in trunks and boxes. Samuel and Elizabeth were waiting with Clara, who had kindly offered to watch them while Luke and Meredith collected the children. These are our children, Samuel and Elizabeth, Meredith introduced as they arrived. Samuel, Elizabeth, these are James, Henry, and Anna. They're going to be living with us now. The children regarded each other solemnly for a moment before Elizabeth, ever the peacemaker, stepped forward and offered Anna her favorite doll. You can play with her if you want, she said. Her name is Daisy. Anna hesitated, then reached for the doll, a tiny smile breaking through her grief for the first time. The adjustment wasn't easy. There were tears and tantrums, nightmares and moments of overwhelming grief as the Carleton children mourned their parents. The Preston home, once spacious, now felt full to bursting with 5 children under its roof. Luke added another room to the house, working through the evenings to create space for all of them. But there were good moments too, moments that gradually became more frequent as the weeks passed. The sight of all 5 children playing together in the yard, James teaching Samuel how to throw a lasso, Henry and Elizabeth collaborating on elaborate make-believe games, Anna following Meredith around the house, wanting to help with whatever she was doing. Their healing, Luke observed one evening as they watched the children from the porch. Slowly, but they are. We all are, Meredith replied, leaning against his side. I never imagined our family would grow this way, but now I can't imagine it any other. By Christmas, the Carleton children had begun to truly settle into their new life. There were still moments of sadness, still times when one of them would withdraw into memories of their parents. But these were balanced by moments of joy, of belonging. On Christmas morning, as the children gathered around the tree Luke had cut from the nearby forest, their faces alight with excitement, Meredith felt a fullness in her heart that transcended anything she could have imagined on that day years ago when a doctor had told her she would never have children. James approached her as she stood watching the others unwrap their gifts, a small, crudely wrapped package in his hands. I made this for you, he said, offering it with a mixture of pride and uncertainty. Luke helped a little, but mostly I did it myself. Meredith unwrapped it carefully to find a wooden frame, painstakingly carved and sanded, holding a drawing of their family, all 8 of them standing in front of their home. It's beautiful, James, she said, emotion making her voice husky. Thank you. The boy hesitated, then hugged her quickly before darting back to join the others. It was the first time he had initiated such contact, and Meredith cherished it as the gift it truly was. Quite a family we've built, Luke said, coming to stand beside her, his arms slipping around her waist. Quite a family, Meredith agreed, leaning into his embrace. Not at all what I expected when you walked into my store that day. Luke chuckled. Life rarely gives us what we expect, he said. Sometimes it gives us so much more. As the years passed, the Preston family became a fixture in Silver Creek. The children grew, each finding their own path, but bound together by the love that had brought them together in the first place. Samuel followed in his father's footsteps, showing an innate understanding of horses and cattle that promised a future in ranching. Elizabeth revealed a sharp mind for business, helping in the mercantile from an early age and eventually taking over much of its management as Meredith's responsibilities at home expanded. James, with his quiet determination, excelled in school and set his sights on studying law in Denver. Henry discovered a talent for woodworking, apprenticing with the town's carpenter and creating pieces of furniture that became sought after throughout the region. And Anna, sweet Anna, blossomed into a young woman with a gift for healing, assisting the town's doctor and dreaming of formal medical training. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Luke surprised Meredith with a journey back east to visit the places of her childhood in Boston. It was a luxury they could now afford, with the ranch land Luke had gradually acquired and the continued success of the mercantile. As they stood on the shores of the Atlantic, watching the waves crash against the rocky New England coast, Meredith felt the full circle of her life from the girl who had lost everything and journeyed west seeking only survival, to the woman who had found love and built a family against all odds. Any regrets? Luke asked, his arm around her shoulders, his face lined now with a decade of Wyoming sun and wind, but his eyes still as blue and clear as the day they'd met. Meredith looked up at him. This man who had seen value in her when others saw only what she lacked, who had given her a love so deep and true it had changed not just her life, but the lives of 5 children who called them family. Not a single one, she said, standing on tiptoe to kiss him as the ocean breeze swirled around them. Every step led me to you, to our children, to the life we've built. How could I regret any of it? As the sun set over the Atlantic, painting the sky in colors that reminded her of Wyoming sunsets, Meredith thought of the doctor's words that had once seemed to define her future. Your womb is empty. Words that had nearly broken her spirit, but had ultimately led her to a man who saw beyond them, who had declared her heart full and worthy of love. And in the fullness of time, her womb had proven not to be empty after all, blessing them with 2 children of their own blood. But more importantly, her heart had expanded to embrace 3 more children who needed the love she had in abundance to give. They returned to Silver Creek in the welcoming arms of their children, to the home they had built and the community that had become truly theirs. And as the years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren and then great-grandchildren, the story of Meredith and Luke Preston became part of the fabric of the town, a testament to the power of love to heal, to create, to build something lasting from what others might discard. They said her womb was empty. People would recount, but a cowboy said her heart was full, and she bore his son. It was a simple tale that grew in the telling, becoming almost mythic in its proportions. But the truth at its core remained unchanged, a love that had seen beyond limitation to possibility, beyond what was to what could be. And in the end, that was the legacy Meredith and Luke Preston left to their children and their children's children. The knowledge that love, true and enduring, could overcome any obstacle, heal any wound, and create miracles where none seemed possible.